Right, this is Evolutionary Book Club on Chapter 7 on Higher Development. We're going to be talking about the chapter Hierarchy of Minds with Mark Ross and with Emily Genren, and this is Blake Anderson. So we're going to be talking, I guess, basically about Chapter 7, and yeah, I'm not sure how you guys want to start it off, but what are your kind of original thoughts about the chapter, would you say?
Well, let's describe what it was about quickly, I guess. Let's start there. Emily, do us the honors.
Emily, you're good at this. So.
Tell us what you read.
Sweet. So, this chapter is talking about the, like Blake said, the higher levels of development. And he's really talking about the transition from what he calls conventional, which, you know, an everyday person walking around would call regular adult development, just take an average adult, and that's conventional. And he's talking about post-conventional. And that sort of transition, that shift goes from more mind rational based, using feelings and sensations as a way to orient yourself to reality. And then the shift is towards being able to immediately access reality, to be able to have direct contact with it. And then the stages of development that are birthed from that point forward. And he breaks them down into pluralism and integralism are the first two that you encounter. And then that transition point. And then following that transition point, you have the illumined mind, the intuitive mind, the overmind, and the supermind. And he goes through what each of those levels of development are. And then he also, at the end, speaks to how development occurs. So it's quite a tour de force. This chapter. Interesting. Where did you guys want to start?
Well, and then I'll also add that at the end of the chapter, he goes over the Wilbur-Holmes list, which is going through the stages of development and adding the states, so that there's the sort of vertical growth and the horizontal development as well that happens. And I think that's a really interesting model and a really insightful one. Helps us under the states and the levels in a way that is really unique and interesting.
Yeah, like sort of the state experience is the different states with the levels of development, which is kind of a new thing that I think that they came up with in the last a few years at least. I know that Wilbur used to just think about the states, the higher states is just kind of on top of the levels of development, whereas this is more like there's just a more complete picture where you can have a state experience even at the lower stages of development, right?
Yep. Yeah. So one of the things that struck me as I was reading is a kind of almost like a pull, an attraction to these higher levels, because I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I know very well what it's like to be in supermind or overmind. I mean, I kind of have ideas about what that might look like and feel like, but to say that I know those levels and that I'm really familiar and at home in those, I would be lying. So I was attracted by what I was reading. I was slightly, kind of curious and wondering, well, okay, I think I get a sense of what that would be like, and at the same time, I'm not 100% sure. And so that was something that pulled me through the chapter and helped me just have a kind of an open mind to what these things that they're describing actually are. And if in fact there are people like, Combs and Wilbur and many others who really are there and what they would describe these states as being and levels as being like. So that was one of the things I observed as I was reading. Yeah,
I think we're all there too, right? I mean, unless one of you guys are enlightened yet, I think that we're definitely.
It happened yesterday. I forgot to tell you about that. Yeah.
I
So,
noticed the purple glow around you. That's good.
but it's yeah, it's something you can read about, and something you might have state experiences of it. I mean, um, but yeah, it is something that is beyond, or it's over our head in some ways, right? Um, I think, right?
Well, it will always be over our head.
Yeah.
That's
Although
it's kind of the point.
although we always aspire for it, right? And I mean, that doesn't mean that we're never going to get there. I mean, um,
Well,
I just
and
mean
then
outside mind.
there's also the complication that we're reading a book, so it's coming in to our body mind, through the intellect, through the cognitive stream of development, line of development. And so at the same time, these authors are trying to point to something that is beyond this kind of cognitive line, into other states and other stages of development, and even other lines. I would imagine they would quickly add that. So it's interesting that you're kind of trying to understand these levels, these different ways of being in the world, through a perspective that in itself is somewhat limited when it comes to being in those states. Does that sound like gibberish, or do you understand what I'm saying?
sense. I mean, to a certain degree, any level you're at, you're going to interpret, I guess, experience or phenomenon from that stage, right? Although we can always, push ourselves, I think, to see things beyond just where we're at currently. Like, I mean, I think that there's ability to do that, where we can glimpse things that are beyond our stage, although we might not have a full understanding or be able to fully incorporate them. Yeah, what do you think about that, Emily?
Yes, I agree with that filtering of perception, and that's really what these higher levels of development are pointing to. Is that it's essentially how our interior informs what we perceive as our exterior, right? He's at the end. He talks about whether the sort of internal motivation, right, whether that is the thing driving the process, or whether it's an experience that sort of pulls us up, right? And that's a really interesting thing to think about. And he gave the example that, it happens both ways. It happens in the way that you could sort of work for it, right, and attain something, or that you just have a spontaneous experience and it's somehow miraculously able to stabilize. But those two sort of, I suppose, outliers aside, right? For the everyday person who's interested in these things, it's really essential to keep in mind that you're not seeing things clearly, right? These filters really do play into our perception of what's going on, and really just trying to, as much as possible, take in what's occurring and excuse me, and not relying too heavily on the conclusions that one individual draws, because there's so many influences that there's almost, there's no way for one, not no way, but it's really difficult for one individual to come to an objective sort of understanding of these things without being able to discuss them with other people and see where the overlap is.
And I think what you're pointing to is kind of a process perspective, right? That it's always that kind of evolutionary perspective that we can't ever say that we're going to be at one static place. There's always going to be more development, right? So any conclusions we draw could temporarily be the case, and I mean that's why you just got to hold them lightly, because there's always greater complexity. There's always more development. That's what makes life exciting, I think.
Yeah. And that's why reading a book like this about these higher levels of development and sort of pointing towards these really realized states is interesting for people like ourselves that are aspiring to climb up and to go higher, and can in some ways serve as kind of signposts on our journey. But again, I mean, the old cliche that the map is not the territory. So the book itself and the words used in the book are trying to identify something the words are not that something, right? So it's the
Yeah.
we have to see